So this following video is just a resource for anybody who was absent on the day of the lab or anybody that just needed some supplemental affirmation on some of the things that we did in class for the voltage lab. So let's go ahead and take a look. I've got everything set up here ready to go where we're going to work through the voltage lab. The lab is going to consist of you wiring the resistors in series, parallel, and combination, just like we did with the resistance in the circuit lab. This time, what's going to be different is, as you can see also with our diagrams, that we're going to connect it to the battery. So I'm going to demonstrate that as well. You'll notice too on this lab that there is the locations for the resistances for our resistors in series, parallel, and combination. You do not need to recollect this data. You will just transfer this data from the previous lab to this one. And then we're going to, once we're done with this lab, we're going to transfer the resistance and voltage data to the final lab, which is all about current. So you do not need to revisit the resistance data. You just need to transfer from the previous lab, which is why it's very, very important that in this lab you use the same drawer that you did for the resistance lab, and that you assign the resistors A, B, and C for the second part of the lab according to what you had as A, B, and C for the resistance lab previously. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to collect data for voltage for our circuit. I've got mine set up very similar to how I had encouraged everybody to work with the resistors last class. These resistors values aren't that important. They're a little different than what you have. But I've got my resistors set up. So this is going to be resistor 1, resistor 2, and resistor 3. So like I said, we are going to be using the battery, but one of the things that I want to make sure that you understand and maybe even incorporate as a part of your strategy in wiring circuits is to go ahead and wire the resistors together first, and then you can wire to the battery. So we have to put these three resistors in series, just like we did last class with when we did the resistances lab. But I'm going to make the beginning of my circuit right here for my series. Then I want current to flow through this resistor. So this will be the beginning of the resistor, the end of the resistor. I'm going to take the end of this resistor and connect it to what I'm going to make the beginning of resistor 2. So beginning of resistor 1 to end of resistor 1 to the beginning of resistor 2 to the end of resistor 2. Then I'm going to take the end of resistor 2 to connect to the beginning of resistor 3. So I'm making this the beginning of resistor 3, which makes this the end of my circuit. All three of these are in series because there's just one pathway through them from the beginning to end. Now it's very simple then to include the battery as we power up this circuit. I'm going to connect my two batteries together like we did in the Ohm's Law lab. And then I'm going to take, I always like to start with the positive terminal as the beginning of my circuit. So I'm going to take the positive terminal to the beginning of my series, as we identified, and then I'm going to take the negative terminal to the end of my series. My circuit is now complete, and there's current running through my circuit, and I can measure voltage. Measuring voltage is very easy with our multimeter. That we are going to dial this to the 20V setting. And the rule of thumb when measuring voltage is that anything that is in between the probes of my multimeter, we're going to measure the voltage drop for. So if I want the voltage drop for just resistor 1, V subscript 1, I'm just going to touch both sides of resistor 1. Okay. And the value that reads on my multimeter is the value. So this is 0.09 volts, not a ton. And for resistor 2, okay, is going to be just touching either side of resistor 2. Resistor 3 is right there. Okay. If I want 1 and 2 together, V subscript 1 and 2, I'm going to go from the beginning of resistor. That keeps popping out. And it really doesn't matter which of these two springs as I reconnect it, because remember, those are both the same location. So maybe I'll just put it there. All right. So So if I want 1 and 2 together, I'm going to go from the beginning of resistor 1 to the end of resistor 2 to get that voltage reading. Okay, it's very important that you do that correctly. Then if I want V subscript 2 and 3, I'm going to go from the beginning of resistor 2 to the end of 3. And then all 3 together, I'm going to go from the beginning of resistor 1 to the end of resistor 3. Okay, so that's the series. Now to do our parallel, I'm going to disconnect my battery. I always like to disconnect the power supply when I'm setting up my circuits, just so I'm not stressing out the battery. Sometimes we can do that. So my parallel, I'm going to make this side the beginning of my parallel circuit. So I need to make a common connection. So all 6 of these springs are now connected together with these 2 wires. Then I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to connect this side of all my resistors. Okay, so now all 6 of these springs are now connected as a common thing. So it's essentially like taking all 3 of the ends of these resistors and twisting them together, taking all 3 of these and twisting them together. So I'm going to make this the beginning of my circuit, this the end of my parallel. So I'm just going to power this side of my circuit. I can actually put this wire on any one of those 6 resistors or 6 springs to power it, but I'm just going to go ahead and put it here. Connecting it here, connected it to all of those locations. Likewise, on this side, I'm going to go ahead and connect my negative terminal to this, which connects it all the way connects it to all of these. So I've got my parallel set up, and as I go to the parallel data collection, I need to get V1, V2, V3, and then all 3 together. So again, V1, V2, V3, and all 3 together, and I'll have my data for voltage for resistors and parallel. So then for the combination, when I set up my combination circuit, I'm going to actually disconnect my power supply. And then to make my combination, I just need to remove this wire here because I want resistor 1 to be by itself. So this will be the beginning of my circuit. For my combination, starts here, goes through this resistor, and then goes through this wire to this side of my parallel. This is going to be the beginning of my parallel. This is going to be the end. It's not always obvious what's the beginning and end of my compound circuit with the series and parallel. And so, but the beginning is it makes sense. The end always doesn't make sense. Like I said, if I want current to flow through, it's going to flow through here to this side of my parallel and then across over here. So then I'm going to connect at the end of my circuit there, and now current's flowing through, and I can get my R1 or my voltage drop 1, the voltage drop from my parallel, and the voltage drop for all 3. When I do all 3, I'm going to go from the beginning of the circuit to the end of my circuit with my probes. Okay, so that's how you collect data for all the resistors being the same. Then you're going to need to go to the 3 resistors being different. And remember, you need to make sure that resistor A, B, and C are the same resistors you had for A, B, and C from the previous lab. So you're going to want to arrange them on your circuit board the same exact way from the previous lab. And you'll collect the data the same way that I just demonstrated with resistors that were all the same. So if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and good luck.